Hello and good evening, and welcome to our discussion regarding the control of the estrous cycle in cats. This will be group 7. Some of the topics that we will be reviewing in this lecture include puberty, stages of the estrus in the queen, length of the estrus in the queen, ovulation, and tactics for controlling population, including pets and feral populations. On average, queens begin cycling between 5 and 9 months of age, after they attain a body weight of approximately 2 kilograms. However, there are many factors that influence the onset of puberty, including breed, the time of year, or primarily it depends on the photoperiod. Another factor depends on the health of the queen. And finally, the last factor is nutrition of the queen. Our next topic discussed will be what are the different stages of estrus in queens. The estrus cycle of a queen is unique to domestic species and consists of 5 distinct stages of estrus. These stages include proestrus, estrus, interestrus, diestrus, and anestrus. We will review all of these stages as well as the characteristics of each. Proestrus is the first phase of estrus and is characterized by rapid follicular growth and formation. The hormones present at this stage are follicle-stimulating hormone, otherwise known as FSH, as well as estradiol. An average of 3 to 7 follicles will develop and begin to partake in estradiol synthesis. While these follicles are partaking in estradiol synthesis, this is the time in which queens will attract toms, but they will not be sexually receptive to them. The signs of proestrus can be obvious or subtle. In most cases, proestrus is not detected regularly in queens. Despite this, some queens may begin to show changes in behavior that include increased vocalizations, an increase in appetite, and finally, one of the last signs is rolling. The queen may also become more restless and affectionate. Typically, they rub their faces against objects, other cats, or their human companions. Queens may also assume the lordosis position. This is where their tails will obtain a sideward displacement. Queens will also begin to raise their hips in an upward fashion. By raising their hips, naturally, their forelegs will be lowered. And finally, the last addition of this position will be that their hind legs will also be held high. However, upon addition of the tomcat, they will not be sexually receptive and may even show aggression to the male by hissing or striking with their paws. The proestrus portion can last anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days. Estrus occurs after proestrus and is characterized by the presence of multiple dominant follicles and a sharp rise in estradiol concentrations in the blood. Many of the signs are behavioral. The most indicative of the behavioral manifestations that can be observed in the queen that is in estrus is typically receptive. Similar to what we discussed in proestrus, queens will also illustrate an increased need for affection, vocalizations, rolling, and rubbing. But these signs will be more heightened than in comparison to proestrus. Another notable behavior of estrus is the queen's uptake of the lordosis stance, followed by sexual receptivity to the tomcat. The lordosis stance can usually be induced by stroking the queen's back during estrus. This is usually done by their human companion. The queen in estrus will also urinate more frequently, and on occasion you can exhibit them urine spraying and marking. This is important for depositing hormones and pheromones and access signals of a reproductive status to other cats. Estrus lasts an average of 4 to 7 days, and the queen enters estrus every 17 days during long photoperiods if they do not ovulate. When a queen does not ovulate after estrus, interestrus will follow. This is the intermediate period of sexual inactivity between successive waves of follicular function in cycling queens. At this time, serum estradiol concentrations will return back to base levels and breeding behaviors will cease. Interestrus lasts from 1 to 3 weeks, after which the queen will return to proestrus. In the case that ovulation does occur during estrus, diestrus proceeds. The corpus lutea is formed within 1 to 2 days after ovulation of the oocyte. Once established, the corpus lutea begins to secrete progesterone. The corpus luteum remains functional for an average of 35 to 40 days in non-pregnant queens and 40 to 50 days in a pregnant queen. In the presence of functional corpus luteum, the queen ceases breeding behaviors, making it hard to distinguish if the queen is in estrous or interestrous. Queens will not display breeding behavior for an average of 45 to 50 days until proestrus resumes. Estrous is the next stage in which cycling activity and sexual behavior ceases. Queens are sexually non-inviting and non-receptive. The primary factor that encourages an estrus is periods of short daylight. Because cats are long-day breeders, free-roaming queens typically go into an estrus from October to January due to reduced photoperiod in the northern hemisphere. At this stage, there are low levels of progesterone and low levels of estradiol. What is important to understand here is that although this response is expected in a controlled laboratory setting, it is less predictable in the real world as there is a variation in cycle length. This is because many factors influence the cyclidity of the queen, including artificial lighting, the nutrition of the queen, if she happens to be pregnant, if she believes to be pregnant, also known as pseudo-pregnancy, and finally, one of the last real-world factors is if she has a serious illness. Indoor cats may be stimulated to cycle if artificial light lengthens the queen's day. Therefore, an indoor queen can cycle throughout the year as long as she receives a minimum of 10 hours of light per day. The next question we will discuss is how long does the estrus cycle last in the feline species? The breeding season, specifically in the northern hemisphere, begins in late January to February and lasts until around October or September. In general, the highest incidence of estrus occurs in February and in March. The next question we will discuss is how often do queens exhibit estrus? Felines are seasonally polyestrous species and long-day breeders. Queens can also have multiple estrus cycles within their breeding season, making them one of the most prolific domestic species. Queens can easily bear 50 to 100 kittens in their breeding life when allowed to mate naturally. Ovulation is our next topic of discussion. The queen is an induced ovulator. This means that sufficient vaginal stimulation via copulation or direct mechanical stimulation must occur for ovulation. Sufficient artificial stimulation or mating causes a surge of GnRH and LH from the anterior pituitary gland. This eventually leads to ovulation of the dominant follicle, and after ovulation, the corpus luteum will form and produce high amounts of progesterone. Corpus luteum form after ovulation and gonadotropins are inhibited by the progesterone synthesis. Estrus ceases with significant vaginal stimulation. However, if copulatory or non-copulatory stimulation does not meet threshold, no spinal neural signal will be sent and the queen will return to proestrus and estrus in the following week. After understanding the estrus cycle, we can now go into the tactics for controlling overgrowth of feline population in pets and feral population. This is where we will explain the different types of ways that we can control the estrus cycle in cats. One of the first tactics that we can discuss is hormonal control. This is where veterinarians will use megestrol acetate to suppress the estrus cycle. Another tactic is to use implants. One of the most common implants is a subcutaneous melatonin implant that also suppresses the estrus cycle. The third tactic is contraceptives. Examples include Gonocon, Ovaban, Depo-Provera, Norplant, and Promone. These contraceptives can be taken in pill form orally or can be given subcutaneously. Another tactic that we can use is to trigger the ovulation of a queen. We can do this in two different ways. The first way is sham breeding. This is a technique that involves rubbing a cotton swab or something similar into the queen's vagina, allowing it to rub on her cervix. This fools her body into thinking she has had intercourse. She will then naturally ovulate, and this will end estrus. The other way to trigger the ovulation of a queen is to expose her to an experienced tom that has undergone a vasectomy. Finally, one of the most important tactics is a properly managed sterilization vaccination program, such as the Trap and Neuter Return Program. This works to reduce the number of community cats, improve health and the safety of the feline population, as well as reduce the impacts on wildlife. Although there are concerns attached to this method, Overall, there are several effective results that ensure the health and safety of every population. One of an effective result is the long-term management. Reproduction via sterilization reduces and has the potential to eventually eliminate outdoor feline populations. Another effective result of the Trap and Neuter Return program is the use of vaccines. Vaccinating the cats can put public health and safety issues both at ease. Another result is that the nuisance factor of males is decreased since they would be neutered. This includes less noise from fighting, mating, and less potent odors from decreased spraying. Finally, the last positive effect from this program is that community resources such as shelters will be less populated. This also lowers the need to euthanize to create more room for animals. We would like to thank you for watching our presentation on the control of the estrous cycle in cats. This presentation was made by Group 7 from the efforts of McKenna Kozlowski, Kieran White, Bridger Young, Dory Lefwich, and Alana Torres.